Hi, my name is Rodrigo Onofre. I'm the row crop specialist here at Kansas State University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maira Duffeck, and I am the Field Crops Extension Pathologist at Oklahoma State University.
And my name is Ashleigh Faris. I'm the Extension Field Crop Entomologist and Integrated Pest Management Coordinator at Oklahoma State University.
And today we're here team tagging between two states to talk about this very important issue, emerging problem in a lot of the states, corn stunt disease, and as well as the leafhopper, right? We're going to start this presentation talking about the disease through an identification, distribution, and management. And when we talk about corn stunt, right, there's always a question like, what are we really talking about it? And what are the diseases that are involved with this system, right? So, to corn stunt, there are two bacteria, the corn stunt spiroplasma, and as well the maize bush stunt phytoplasma that are under this umbrella of the bacteria side, right? But other studies have also confirmed that two viruses are associated with the disease, with this disease complex, right? The maize rhabdophenovirus and maize streptomosaic virus. What's interesting is in US, only the corn stunt spiroplasma, maize bush stunt phytoplasma, and the rhabdophenovirus have been confirmed here before. The streptomosaic virus, it's been confirmed in South America, but not yet in US. So a little bit of background in the symptomology, right? When we think about corn stunt, what are we looking for? And a lot of the times, what it comes to my mind is that when a deer eats that ear on the corn plants, right, and the corn plants turn purple, that's pretty much some of the symptoms that we're going to be discussing here today. And the challenge with this disease, it's a really hard disease to identify in the field, so it does require some lab testing. So working with your extension agent and you're in the state to submit samples to the diagnostic lab, it's going to be really important as we prepare ourselves to get into the 2025 season. And as you guys can see here, we have a pretty broad range of symptoms. The reddening of the leaf tip is definitely one of them. The first picture here, even that midrib is becoming purple, right? And as well as the other two pictures here, from the top to the bottom to the top, doesn't really matter much. But we do see this changing coloration, right? And just a broader picture here from the edge of the field, as you guys can see in a high severity incidence, the amount of, I would say, corn plants that are showing these symptomatic symptoms, right? This showing the symptoms of the leaf reddening, right, that tip of the leaf on the upper canopy. So during the 2024 season, all these pictures were taken in Kansas and Oklahoma as well. We start seeing a lot of this purpling, shortening of the nodes, which is another symptom. As the disease say, the corn is stunt, right? A lot of the times, depending when the infection happens, we do see this stunted of the plants being stunted, right? And this shortening of the internodes. Another classic symptom, another classic pictures here, and things that we saw in both Oklahoma and Kansas as well. Another thing was quite interesting for me, especially here in Kansas. We did see this again, like in both states, was this stay green effect, right? And what was interesting for me is like later in the season when folks were about to pick corn, August, September, October, we were seeing a high incidence of this stay green effect, right? This is stay green plants in the field. So pretty much combines were rolling. We're still seeing about 30 to 40% of plants with this fully green, right? So that's another symptom, another I guess symptom that fits into that umbrella of the three pathogens that we have here in US, right? This is stay green affected later in the season. Another symptom that we see is this chlorosis streaks. There are several viruses that can cause similar symptoms. So again, like testing the plant, sending to the lab, and running assays is going to be fairly important, right? And one thing that we have here today, Ashleigh, she's an entomologist in Oklahoma, and she will be talking more about a vector that it's required to transmit this disease, right? So, and talk about the vector, that was pretty much one of the biggest clue for us when we start seeing this honeydew on the corn leaves, which led to this black sooty mold, right? Again, like during the 2020, during the 24 season, we were seeing a lot of this honeydew, uh, the sooty mold on the corn leaves, and we start noticing high numbers of corn leafhoppers. And I don't want to jump into the entomology side here, but that's kind of like what really triggered us to start like looking like what's going on in my field, right? So this is definitely a scouting tip and something for us to keep in mind as we get into the 2025 season. If we're starting seeing, the honeydew or this black sooty mold in the corn leaves will likely have high levels of the corn leafhopper. Yield impact for corn stunt, it's definitely an aggressive disease, especially in South America. In Brazil, Argentina, a lot of these countries, they have been fighting with corn stunt for a while now. And as you guys can see here, yield can be severely affected, right? Especially if that infection happens early in the season. I think between emergence to V8, and we'll talk more about it too, it can definitely cause high severe yield penalties down the line, right? And as you guys can see here, we have missing kernels, lightweight, and definitely that yield potential, right? It's pretty much out of the scope here. And just another picture here highlighting how aggressive this disease can be. Here we have some kernels with healthy plant and then infected plant on the left here. So yield can be a problem, can be a severe loss at the end of the season, and it really will depend on when that infection happened. Another symptom that we did see here in Kansas as well as in Oklahoma, it was this proliferation of ears, right? The biggest challenge is here we have a corn plant with 6 ears, but those ears, they're not really like carrying a lot of grain. They're more, pretty much empty in terms of grain and yield potential, right? And we did see high levels in certain regions of Kansas, I would say, like especially in that very southwest of Kansas, we did see more. And I think what's interesting too is the combination of hybrid environment when the infection happened, when the inoculum was transmitted to those corn plants, everything will imply or will change those symptoms, right? Especially hybrid. There's a big impact between hybrid to hybrid if it's an irrigated or dry drought condition too. And that's pretty much what we saw here. Depending where you were in Kansas, we were seeing different symptoms, right, of this disease. So, and we're talking a lot about, growth stage. And I mentioned before that from emergence to V8, that's when the corn plants are most, I would say, susceptible to this disease. A lot of studies that have done, I would say, a good amount of efforts were put in there just to understand like what's the most susceptible period in the growth stage, right? And again, like between emergence to V8, it seems like the disease multiplies faster, colonize faster the corn plants, and of course, we have a higher yield impact. And typically, what we'll see is from R1 in the reproductive stage, right? That's when the symptoms becomes more evident. And I always say, like, when you're walking a cornfield and there's like a stunted plant, you're tasseling, so you're a 6 feet tall corn plant. So that's going to start thinking like, wow, what's going on in my field, right? As well, that changing color, right? That also becomes more evident with the reproductive stage. So, and Ashleigh will cover more about the leafhopper, but it's going to be really important for us to keep a track of those leafhoppers on that early stage of the corn plants. But infection can happen at any stage, but the symptoms, they're going to become more evident again later in the season.
All right, so it is corn stunt and yield disease. So for the farmers that have been working with corn from the last 30 years, for them, corn stunt is indeed a yield disease since they haven't been experienced any problems with corn stunt in the United States for the last 35 years. What I'd like to emphasize here is that actually corn stunt is a disease that we call reemergent. So it's a disease that was reported in the past, stay a period of time without causing problem, and now it reemerged again, causing yield losses in corn crop. So corn stunt was reported for the first time in 1945 in the Rio Grande Valley, that is the south part of Texas. And also we have the presence of the corn leafhopper being reported 3 years before, also in this region here in the south part of Texas. And then from 1945 until 1980, this disease was a problem in the southern part of the United States, especially in Texas, also in California and Florida. However, after that, we have a timeline that this disease was not present in the United States. So for 35 years, we didn't notice any evident symptoms of corn stunt in the United States. We know that in 2016, also in the Rio Grande Valley, we start to see again the presence of the corn leafhopper, that is the insect vector associated and the transmit the pathogens associated with corn stunt. However, the disease symptoms are not present, or if they are present in the field in that time, it didn't cause any yield losses. But now in 2024 is when we start to see the spread of corn stunt symptoms for other parts of the United States. And then we start to see also the yield losses associated with those symptoms. I'd like to emphasize that Oklahoma State University was the first university in the United States that reported the presence of corn stunt in the fields for the first time. And we have here a QR code that guides us for the publication that was posted on August 12 in the ePest alert. That is one of the resources that we use as extensionists at Oklahoma State University to distribute information for growers and stakeholders. So we are the first ones that put an alert out there for growers and stakeholders to look for corn stunt symptoms and also corn leafhoppers in their fields, because we start to see that this was causing problems in Oklahoma, and we'd like to also alert the other states that can be also possibly dealing with this problem in 2024 growing season. After we provide this report, we kind of generate this alert for other states, and then other states also start to confirm the presence of corn stunt in their fields. So we have here a summary of the reports of corn stunt in 2024 that was provided by University of Missouri, also detected in Minnesota. Kansas, as Rodrigo already mentioned, we saw symptoms of the disease and also some impact in yield losses in Kansas State. We also have here New York State also reporting corn stunt, South Dakota, and also Texas. But what was the distribution of corn stunt in 2024? So the map that I'm showing here is the result of a collaboration that was established from Oklahoma State University extension pathologists and entomologists with the extensionists from other states. So what happened is that the other states start to see the symptoms of corn stunt in their fields, and then they send samples to us, to Oklahoma State University, for us to do the confirmation of the corn stunt spiroplasma that is the main pathogen associated with this disease. So in orange here, you have the counties highlighted where the spiroplasma conchyli was associated with corn stunt symptoms in those corn fields. So in Oklahoma, we reported 6 counties where corn stunt was confirmed. In Kansas, we have 16 counties. And then we have several states such as South Dakota, Nebraska, Missouri, Wisconsin, Indiana, that reported just 1 county with corn stunt symptoms. But we also have Missouri here with 2 counties. Arkansas reported in 2 counties. We have New York State also reported corn stunt in 2024 growing season in 4 counties, especially here more close with the Lake Erie. And we have Alabama that was a state that is still in November send us some samples, and we're still able to identify that those symptoms that they're seeing in the fields was associated with corn stunt disease. And then I put here, Alabama was the last one in 2024 and counting, because we believe that other states also may have experienced some symptoms of corn stunt, but this was misdiagnosed, was mistaken by other symptoms that we have in the field caused by nutritional deficiency, as Rodrigo already mentioned, and also by drought stress and heat stress that also can cause similar symptoms associated with corn stunt. So what I'd like to highlight here is that for us to be able to identify if the symptoms that we are seeing in the field is caused by corn stunt pathogens, or if it's caused by other stressors that we experience throughout the growing season, we need to send samples back to a laboratory specialized to the molecular that can test those leaf samples using molecular techniques for us to be able to identify if those symptoms is really caused by corn stunt or is caused by other factors. So what do we know about the transmission of these corn leaf hoppers, these corn stunt pathogens by the corn leaf hopper? So the data that I'm showing here in this diagram format was data that was collected in other countries by researchers that have been working with corn stunt for a longer period of time. So they conducted these essays in laboratory to try to verify how long it takes for a corn leaf hopper to be able to pick it up, the pathogens from a plant that is infected until it is able to transmit these pathogens to a healthy plant. So here we have the information for corn stunt spiroplasma and maize bush stunt phytoplasma, that is 2 bacteria involved with this complex. We also have the information for the maize hyadofinoviruses. That is one of the viruses also involved with this corn stunt complex. So what we know here, following the order number 1, is that the corn leaf hoppers need from 1 hour to 6 hours of feeding in an infected corn plant to be able to acquire all those pathogens. And after those pathogens are inside the leaf hopper, we need some time for these pathogens to multiply inside of the body of the leaf hopper for this leaf hopper to be able to transmit those pathogens to a health corn plant. So the process from the acquisition of the pathogens until the inoculation of those pathogens to a health corn plant, it needs some time for those pathogens to multiply inside of the insect vector. So we know that takes from 8 days until 28 days for the pathogen to multiply inside of the corn leaf hopper, for then this corn leaf hopper be able to transmit to a health corn plant. And when the corn leaf hopper is feeding into a health corn plant, it takes from 1 to 8 hours of feeding for this insect to be able to transmit all those pathogens. And what we also know is that once the pathogens are inside the corn plant, we cannot see the symptoms of disease right away. It needs, we used to say, from 3 to 4 weeks for us to start to see the symptoms of the disease, because again, the pathogen needs time inside of the corn plant to be able to express damage the plant in a way that the plant is going to start to express the symptoms of corn stunt. So until the corn leaf hopper infected with corn stunt pathogens feeds into a healthy corn plant until we start to see the symptoms in the field, it takes from 3 to 4 weeks. So when you see the symptoms of the corn stunt in the field, it's kind of too late for us to take any management strategy or to act, because actually that plant was infected a long time ago. Another question that we had when we first report corn stunt in the state of Oklahoma was regarding the temporal and spatial distribution of corn stunt in the fields. So what I'm going to show now is the result of research that was conducted here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, where we're lucky enough to have that late planted corn field in one of our research stations, and we start to monitoring weekly the presence of corn stunt symptoms in this field. So here we are seeing a picture that was taken by drone in this corn field. We have here around 1 acre with 25,000 corn plants in this field. And what did you do was to go every week for a period of 4 weeks in this corn field, and we counted these plants one by one, and we identify if these plants are showing symptoms of corn stunt. And when I mention symptoms of corn stunt, what we're looking for, right? So we're looking for especially this reddening of the leaf tips that start in the upper part of the corn canopy. We're also looking for the overproduction of corn ears. We're looking for stunted plants, and also the production especially of this chlorosis or reddening streaks in the corn leaves. So we went plant by plant and we tried to identify which plants are showing or not symptoms of corn stunt. And we conducted the survey throughout 4 weeks. So from August 15 until September 6. So what you're seeing here is a representation of each corn plant that was in that field. So in green here, we have the disease plant, the plants that are showing symptoms of corn stunt. And in black, we have broken plants that broken in the field for several reasons. So this is the result for the first week. We start to see that we have, especially in the border here, more plants showing symptoms of corn stunt and some in the middle also. When you move for the second week of scouting, we start to see more this board effect where plants showing symptoms of corn stunt was more evident here in the borders of the cornfield. And this explains a lot because we know that the corn leafhopper migrate from other cornfields. And then when they arrive in a cornfield, they start to feed first in the corn plants that are in the border of the field. And then we start to see that this was exactly what happened in this field because we start to see first the expression of symptoms of corn stunt in the plants that are in the border of the field. Here we have for week 3 in August 30, we start to see again more proeminent symptoms of corn stunt in the borders of the field. And then that's the result for the 4th week that was in September 6th. We can also see a lot of these plants already showing symptoms of corn stunt. And especially here from the south part towards the north part of the field, that's where probably the corn leafhopper population arrived first, start to feeding into those plants and transmit those pathogens. And then we start to see first the symptoms of corn stunt in the borders or in the south part, and then this gradient towards the north part of the field. What I'd like to highlight here is that in the end of our survey, 61% of the plants were showing symptoms of corn stunt and 39% we considered healthy. What I'd like to emphasize here is that I'm calling these plants healthy because I'm not seeing the expression of symptoms of corn stunt. However, I do believe that all the plants in this field, they are infected with the corn stunt pathogens. The only difference here is that the plants in the south part of the fields and in the borders, they got infected first throughout the growing season, and then it allowed time for those pathogens to multiply inside the corn plants and allow us for having visible symptoms of corn stunt in this field. While the others that are infected later was not showing the expression of symptoms of corn stunt, but the pathogens could be inside those plants. And how do we manage corn stunt, right? So this is the main question that we receive from growers when we start to talk about this disease. So unfortunately, we do not have any curative strategy to manage corn stunt in the field. And what do we mean by that, right? It means that once we see the symptoms of the disease in the field, there is nothing more that we can do. There is no product that we could apply to stop the development or the progression of the corn stunt symptoms in the field by directly targeting the pathogens. So those pathogens, as Rodrigo already mentioned, they are phloem restricted. They move inside of the phloem of the corn plant. And there's no product currently available that we could spray in the fields and could stop the progression and the multiplication of those pathogens inside of the corn plant. So I'd like to emphasize here that the management of the corn stunt disease is going to rely on the management of the corn leafhopper, that is the insect that transmits the corn stunt pathogens to the plants. I also would like to highlight the importance of the controlling of the volunteer corn after you harvest the corn fields, right? So here is a picture that I took from a field in Oklahoma on November 14, where we see a lot of corn, volunteer corn in this field, and some of those volunteer corn plants are already showing symptoms of corn stunt, as you may see here, this reddening of the leaf tips. And when you brought back samples from to the laboratory of those volunteer corn, we're able to detect the pathogen that is involved with corn stunt disease, that is the Spiroplasma conchylae. So I'd like to mention that the management of the volunteer corn is very important. And if you have a field where you was not hit by this hard frosts, I do recommend you to go inside and control these volunteer corn plants, because they can act as both harboring the pathogens that are involved with the corn stunt complex, and also they provide shelter for the corn leafhopper insect that is the insect involved with the transmission of those pathogens, as Dr. Ashleigh Faris is going to talk more about it in the next slides.
So yeah, just a couple of take-home message here, just to bring it all together, right? So what should we do for the 2025 season? I think there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of risk that's still up there in the air if 2025 is going to be as endemic was as 2024 season. But just remember that number one, there are no curative strategies for corn stunt, right? After you got it. There's not much to do in terms of controlling or putting a pause on that disease spread, right? Um, our fungicides, they're not going to work. They're not going to do anything towards that disease control, right? As Maira already said several times. We did see a diversity of symptoms, which makes it really challenging for us to ID this disease in the field. So do work with your local extension agents to submit samples to your diagnostic labs. Testing will be important to confirm what you have, when you have, and the symptoms that you're seeing in the field, right? It can be tricky, as we mentioned, fertility, drought, as well as even like missing that ear, right? That deer effect when it's that ear becoming purple. Those are all symptoms that can overlap when we're trying to identify corn stunt in the field. I would say between emergence to V8, that's when the plants are going to be most susceptible to this disease, the corn stunt disease. So just remember that, it's scouting. It's going to start early, not just for the disease, but as well as for the corn leafhopper, which Ashleigh will be talking about here in a moment. And as well, hybrid susceptibility, right? Unfortunately, again, there are no hybrids that are resistant to the disease, neither to the insect here in US. It's something for us to keep in mind and keep pushing to eventually us having some options. But currently right now, there's no hybrids available for US for the 2025 season that we are aware, right? Avoid late planting corn and double crop corn just because those crops are going to be at higher risk for disease, for infection and disease development, just because, there's that green breeze, right? Those hoppers are going to be on that first crop and they're going to be moving to the second crop, late planted, which the second crop is going to be at a younger growth stage, and they're going to be at, again, high susceptibility for the disease to develop and, of course, affect that yield. If you're planting corn in a field nearby a field that has already been confirmed with corn stunt, right? That's definitely something that we should avoid for this upcoming season. Just keep in mind that, again, those hoppers can move into the new crop. And volunteer corn, as Maira said, corn that's in wheat fields or soybean fields, sorghum fields, those are definitely we should just get rid of it just because of that source of inoculum for the leafhoppers and transmitting to your crop, right? Testing and monitoring for both for the corn stunt pathogens and the leafhopper are going to be key. And Ashleigh will be covering more on the leafhoppers as we follow here.
Yeah, and the main message here for the growers in 2025 growing season is don't be scared, be prepared. So go frequently to the fields and scout for the corn leafhopper because it will be our main strategy to manage this insect vector and also avoid the transmission of those corn stunt pathogens.
So switch gears, let's talk a little bit about the insect inside of this pathosystem. So we're talking about the corn leafhopper, which the genus and species is going to be Daubolus matus. And so this is, again, like the common name implies, one of those leafhopper species. So interesting things about leafhoppers, they're going to be phloem feeders. They're very efficient vectors. And so there's been research that really looks at a lot of their feeding patterns. And corn leafhoppers seem to be one of those leafhoppers that once they get to feeding on a plant, they're going to be able to take up a lot of those saps and juices, cycle and circulate it through their body. And then in order to be able to eliminate some of that water, they're going to have to create that honeydew. And so that's going to be the secretion of that excess sugar that they're taking in, and they're depositing it on the plant, which then can turn into kind of that sooty mold that we saw in the slides from Maira and Rodrigo earlier. So when we're talking about this insect, it's one that has simple metamorphosis. The immatures are going to look just like the adults, except they're not going to have wings. And when we're thinking about the immatures, there's going to be up to 5 of those nymphal or immature instar stages. Now, they have exponential growth. So in addition to their efficiency as vectors, the other thing that makes them kind of a very big threat is the fact of their high fecundity and how quickly they can progress through this life cycle. And just like with any insect, this life cycle is highly linked to temperature dependency. So the warmer it is, the faster they seem to go through that life cycle. Now, their evolution is closely tied to maize. They reproduce only in corn or teosinte. And so what we know about the leafhopper is they originated in Mexico, where we have history of corn that's planted continuously throughout the year. So really nice resource for this insect. And you'll see more of why that is here in a moment when we talk more about the biology of the insect itself. So just like with any pest, we need to know what we are looking for in order to have a strong integrated pest management program. And the thing with the corn leafhopper is it looks very, very similar to the other species within the Daubolus genus. And actually, to be able to confirm that you have a corn leafhopper first, for those of us with the outbreaks this year, we had to actually go ahead and look at those male genitalia. And so we needed to make sure that we were actually dealing with the correct species. And the only way to do this is to be able to dissect them. For now, we can pretty confidently say that what we are seeing in the field is the corn leafhopper based on some other morphological traits, which I'll show you here in a moment. But if you are finding a corn leafhopper for the very first time, possibly in your location or in your state, I would encourage you to go ahead and do some of this identification by confirmation through genitalia. And so when you do that, really what you're going to see is that once you clear out the specimen and you just dissect it, is that the males are going to have this very distinct hooked adiagus. And so that's just their one of their male organs. And you're going to want to look at this underneath the microscope once you've kind of cleared out the insect some. So the resources that I have here on the slides are ones that you can look at for how to do this procedure if that's something that you need to do in the future. And so again, I can't stress proper identification enough, especially when we're talking about an insect that is causing a lot of concern for a lot of people in different places that it hasn't been before. Now, this insect is going to be yellow to tan in color. And so the color can get darker over time. It's going to sclerotize more heavily as it ages. And so they might be a little bit darker. So what I have on the slide here may not be truly representative of what you see actually in the field. They may be lighter or they may be darker. They're going to be pretty small, about 1/8 an inch in size, and they're torpedo or bullet shaped. Well, the characteristic that once you get comfortable with realizing that you do in fact have corn leafhoppers, that you want to be looking for is going to be these 2 dark spots that are located between the eyes of the corn leafhopper. And it kind of looks like they have this little white halo surrounding these 2 dark spots. Okay, so the other thing you're going to notice is that they, in addition to those 2 dark spots with the halo around them, is they're going to have this very deep shaped V on the back of their thorax. And so this characteristic is going to be one that should clue you in that it is in fact a corn leafhopper. Our colleagues at Kansas State, they've actually put together this really nice YouTube video that walks you through some of the male genitalia identification, sorting between males versus females, and then also getting you some better images of what they look like from different types of angles and viewpoints. So again, just kind of focusing in on some of those spots, so you can see them really from any orientation of the insect there at the top. So this is you looking face to face with the corn leafhopper, so to say, looking at it from the top down, and then also from the lateral view over here, you can see that you've got that dark spot there. Now, there's several other types of leafhoppers in general, not Daubolus, but other types of leafhoppers that you are likely going to see if you are monitoring for this insect, and that's not abnormal. So whenever you are looking for it, be sure that you're not just assuming that any leafhopper or any hopper that you see, because there's also plant hoppers too in corn, is going to be a corn leafhopper. And so just to highlight here, we have 2 on this slide that are definitely not corn leafhoppers. So if you go back and look at this, then this insect is a different leafhopper than our corn leafhoppers that we see in these other slides here. And this actually is not a leafhopper itself. It's in fact a plant hopper. So don't just think that you have corn leafhoppers whenever you see something that looks a little bit like this. Really do the due diligence to see what you've got. So in the field, it's a little bit different looking for them. And this is going to be because of how quickly they move and they dart around. So just like us, they don't really like to be totally out in the sun. If they can get to the undersides of leaves, depending on the development stage we're at for our corn, they're going to want to do so. So be looking under the leaves in those shaded areas to see if you can find them. The adults, because of their wings, they can dart and move around very, very quickly. Much different from aphids, which I think a lot of us are more used to as some common pests in our field crops. So you also want to be paying attention for anything that might be flying around as you enter into the field. When we're talking about our younger plants, you can see that they have this kind of aggregative behavior where several of them can be hanging out within the whorl of the corn plant. And that's not abnormal by any means. You also might want to be checking some of the collars of your corn plants too, again, depending on that stage. They like to be tucked away and kind of protected. So when we think about the life cycle of this insect, I want to point out that the data that I'm showing here comes from a number of different literature sources. And majority of these sources are not going to be sources that are here in the United States, or if they are in the United States, they're from select populations. And we don't know for sure what populations we're exactly dealing with here in the US. So that's why you're going to see some variability in some of these numbers or compared to maybe some of the literature that you've read. But this is just kind of an overall scale or an overall view of what we've seen. But when we think about our eggs, going from egg oviposition, the time that they're laid, all the way up through when the adults emerge out of those eggs, it can take anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks, again, highly temperature dependent. The eggs themselves will hatch in about 8 to 11 days. Eggs are usually going to be laid by the corn leafhopper along that midrib into the leaf material. So you're not going to actually see them with your naked eye. They're too small for you to be able to do that. And they actually put them into the leaf tissue. Now, these females, they're going to lay their eggs, probably about 15 eggs within a batch, 10 to 15 usually. And they can lay several egg batches. So in the literature, it shows that they can lay anywhere between 130 to 611 eggs over their lifetime. So again, just that high fecundity is pretty impressive. And for the nymphs, they can progress through that stage in a total of 13 or 17 days. And the adults, this is where we get some really high variability in terms of reports. And again, some temperature dependency on this too. But they can live for several months with a limited resource of corn or even off of corn, like we're going to see here in just a moment. So we can have anywhere between 2 to 12 generations per year under ideal conditions. They need to have, though, a reproductive host, which is only going to be corn. It also needs to have optimal temperature conditions. So freezing temperatures is going to be something that, that they are threatened by if they're at these freezing temperatures for an extended period of time. And also, like with any insect, humidity is a factor that plays a role in their life cycle as well. So for our corn leafhoppers, our nymphs and adults are going to feed, but it's really not the feeding that's going to be causing us the problem. Again, it's going to be the infection with those pathogens that's going to be causing an issue where we're having the disease being shown throughout the plant and those symptoms. Now, as adults, they can overwinter. And so based on literature that we have, I have two really excellent big names associated with corn leafhopper research, is that whenever temperatures are above 23 degrees Fahrenheit, then they can survive. And they can survive off of their hosts. And so when they're overwintering, especially in areas like Oklahoma, Kansas, or anywhere north where we may not have volunteer corn because Mother Nature has taken care of that for us, they may be moving into other overwintering sites, not where they're going to reproduce, but just where they're going to be able to actually take up some sort of nutrient resource, primarily a water source from anything that's green in the environment, so that they can hang out until temperatures are conducive for them again, or until that corn crop is around as well. So we do know also from the literature that whenever a corn leafhopper, a female in particular, is infected with the corn stunt spiroplasma, then she actually has improved overwintering, meaning that they seem to be doing better when they're infected with that spiroplasma. Whenever they have those colder temperatures, they seem to be able to survive them more. So I want to point out, I mentioned earlier about the nymphs and how the nymphs look very similar to the adults, except for the lack of wings. And so this is a really great photo here that indicates what those nymphs look like. And they can be really small because they're going to increase in size over time as well. Now, when we think about overwintering hosts, this data is based off of research, again, that has been done in other locations. But some places where we may be finding some of these corn leafhoppers, especially when temperature conditions are just right, other types of green systems that we have are going to be things like our volunteer corn, which we already covered about how those can also be as a source of the inoculum itself. But they could also potentially be overwintering in places like Johnson grass, sorghum, wheat, rye, gamma grass, alfalfa, or any of the panicum grasses. And so these are going to be a lot of our native grasses. And now I know it's easy to say, okay, you might have the plant, especially like Johnson grass or any of the other native grasses, to where they, when they're touched with that frost or they freeze, then they might go away. Well, remember, a lot of these grasses grow through rhizomes. And so that rhizome is underneath the soil. If that soil temperature is warm enough, and if that leafhopper is possibly able to get into just the top layer of that soil, that might be a warm enough temperature, and that rhizome might be a resource to where they could be getting a water source too. Now, again, the good news is a lot of times these leafhoppers are going to be taken care of by the colder temperatures when we're thinking about anything that's typically north of Texas. And we've been monitoring for those to see if that's actually holding true too. But this again can be seasonality dependent. So if you have a very cold winter, that's probably something that's gonna be very promising for us and not having to worry about this in the future, at least an immediate future problem that's ready to jump into corn the next year. But if you have a mild winter, then that's when we might need to be having some concerns and really investigating what are some potential overwintering sites. So I want to stress with these overwintering hosts, aside from volunteer corn, there's no evidence of the corn stunt pathogens being transmitted to non-maize in nature. There's been studies that show that some things can happen in a lab, but that's under ideal, perfect conditions where something's essentially being forced. But right now in nature, there's no evidence of that occurring. And we've also have some studies that have been done, primarily, I think this one was out of Brazil, where they were looking at where exactly could the corn leafhopper possibly reproduce. And so they were looking at basically any kind of green resource that's in the environment. And the good news is they were only able to actually get corn leafhoppers reproducing on anything that was related to corn. Outside of that, they wouldn't reproduce on it. So that just shows again that corn really is important for us to be monitoring and managing in terms of controlling those populations of our corn leafhoppers in the future. So a big question we get is thinking about, well, how does this migration actually happen? How did we end up with corn leafhoppers for us? And so we've had some periodic outbreaks within the US, as Dr. Duffeck mentioned, since 1942. And so historically, they're going to be overwintering in the highlands of Mexico. And that's an ideal condition, an ideal place, again, because of that continuous growing of corn. So they've got a really nice resource there. But what can happen is we can have some of these winds that cause our insects then to move north out of Mexico, and they're going to carry the insect away from that senescing corn. It's going to be attractive for them to find what the next viable resource is, or maybe a younger corn plant, so they can go ahead and produce higher populations in those areas. So we're kind of getting this large exodus where they come out of these areas, move northward. Historically, they're going into places like California, Texas, also into Florida as well. But I really think that we might be seeing more cyclical kinds of occurrences of this insect, especially if we consider things like warming temperatures, expansion of where we're growing, and also when we start to planting outside of the what was previously the traditional planting times too. We might be building some of these green bridges that are bringing this insect into areas that it wasn't previously before. So for us in Oklahoma, we found the corn leafhopper in several different counties. When we found it, it was actually really towards the middle of the state. And so at that point, we decided to direct all of our efforts in looking for this insect by moving northward. We fortunately, or unfortunately, I guess also, had some really stressed corn down in the southwest part of the state, which is a big corn producing region. But because of the severe drought that we had, the corn leafhoppers actually were not a problem for our producers there. But just above that region, we're learning from our producers now that a lot of our double crop or late planted corn was really hit hard by the corn leafhopper and corn stunt disease. And so we had some spotty reports, and it was interesting at first talking to our producers about this in Oklahoma. Some of them estimated 0%, some were estimating 30 to 60%, or others 80% or more in terms of yield loss attributed to corn stunt disease. And it really just depended on planting time and also if they had the population of the leafhopper there or not. We saw this in both field corn and sweet corn, and I'm stressing about the sweet corn part because in talking to our producers in Oklahoma, a lot of them don't realize that in neighboring fields that surround them or in their communities, there are a number of people that are growing corn more in a horticulture type setting. So that sweet corn, farmer's market type setting. And so being aware of what your neighbors have is something that also can help you be proactive in recognizing and maybe helping each other out with scouting efforts and communicating with each other that someone might be a source around you that you otherwise aren't aware of. And we saw it both in irrigated and non-irrigated fields. And really the difficult part, I think, for us, which was also highlighted by Rodrigo and Maira, was basically teasing out those environmental versus the corn stunt disease symptoms. So again, really had an issue with drought for us in Oklahoma. We also had several different insect pests this season. And in fact, corn is really not intensively managed. And so already, if we're not in the corn actively looking for it, at least here in our area where we grow a lot of corn for silage or for or field corn just for grain in general, it's not something that we have devoted a lot of time to actively scouting corn. And so I think a big part of this is really we were just unaware of what was out there. We didn't know what to look for in terms of the insect. It hadn't been a problem in the past, nor had the pathogens, nor had the disease. So it really kind of just caught a lot of us off guard. So if we think about some of the management of what can we do going into this next growing season, we, I know, usually think about, well, what are some types of technology that's out there available to us? And as we previously mentioned, unfortunately, at this time, there's not any corn that has resistant hybrids for us on the US market. And so that's one challenge that we're facing. I do know people are working on this. They're talking about maybe some kind of patterns or observations that they made off of this last season. But really right now, it's purely that. It's just patterns and best guesses based on observations from this last year. Really, we need to be managing that volunteer corn. So what I can say for us in Oklahoma is that Mother Nature really took care of a lot of this for us, which is great. So we shouldn't have inoculum or volunteer corn readily available for our corn leafhoppers that come up this next growing season, or at least not a resident population of them that we should be too concerned with. We've had a lot of cold temperatures as we've entered into January of 2025, so that's been really beneficial for us. But again, volunteer corn important to manage because we can get rid of that reproductive host and also that reservoir for the pathogens. Planting early is going to be some really good advice. And I know that's very difficult, especially when we talk about our double crop or double wheat and corn kind of system, especially that we have here in Oklahoma, where a lot of times we're waiting on that wheat harvest. And then as soon as wheat is harvested, a lot of our producers will go ahead and try to get a second crop out of that same piece of land by planting that corn. And so if we're doing that, we're possibly delaying the time frame of when that corn goes into the ground. Maybe there could be a population of leafhoppers already in the state because of the corn that was planted earlier and what is coming up in terms of populations out of Mexico up through Texas. So we need to be vigilant on that. So really what I'm going to be suggesting is if you can get your corn past the V8 stage, you're likely going to have the best opportunity to be able to protect that yield from the corn leafhopper and the corn stunt disease itself. So best advice going into next season is to be thinking about using a high rate of insecticide seed treatment. This is going to be really important for our double crop producers or anyone that is planting later in the season too. And so two suggestions we have are that Cruiser Max Corn 1250 or Poncho 1250, so that higher rate. And what these are going to do is ideally provide us protection up until about the V3 stage. What I do want to point out is, again, we don't really know what population we're dealing with. I know that us and I believe also Kansas, that we're working with different colleagues and different groups to send off samples that are going to be doing some of that haplotype testing for us to determine where are these populations coming from. And this matters because we do know that some populations out of places like Brazil and Argentina are showing some resistance to different types of insecticides. And so we need to be aware of where this population is coming from so that we can maneuver our tactics for managing this insect accordingly. So when we're scouting for our insect, you're going to be wanting to check the whorls and the collars of those really, really young plants. Begin at that V1 stage if you're not doing that higher insecticide seed treatment. If you are, you can probably wait until about the V3. And I would be scouting regularly. And what I mean by that is at least once a week at a minimum. You're going to want to begin at the field edges and the borders. And I think this matches up really nicely with the images that Maira showed of how that disease progression kind of happened across that field in Stillwater. And so checking those borders is a good place to start, and then also be looking throughout the field too. And one really nice way to scout for this actively is going to be just taking one of these handheld car vacuums. So you can get one off of Amazon or you can get one at Walmart for 20 bucks or less. And I've got a picture here of some corn leaf hoppers that we were able to section out of some of the whorls from some of our volunteer corn that we had with some producers we were checking out back in October, I want to say. And we were all kind of surprised to see just how many we could pull up out of there. But look for one that has a clear canister on it. That way you can, pull it up really easy, look at it and see, do you have corn leaf hoppers or not? These canisters are usually detachable, so you don't have to worry about re-releasing these out into your field. What you can do is you can then take it, take that canister off, put it in a plastic bag, stick that in the freezer to kill them, and then knock them out, and you can reuse that canister once you empty it out in the future from those frozen leaf hoppers too. So active monitoring, I know it's time intensive, but it is going to be one of your best lines of defense. You can also do some scouting with your sweep nets. And so that slide that I showed earlier with the link to the identification video from K-State, they give a really nice demonstration of how to be sweeping for corn. Sweep netting is not for the faint of heart, is what I will say, even as a seasoned entomologist. It's not always easy. There's such thing as beginner's luck, and then there's also just being able to have the skill or ability to swing that net around. And so it can be difficult depending on the growth stage. But if you don't have the time to go out and get yourself a handheld vacuum, this is also an option for you too. Just know you may be missing some of the population because of how quickly those insects are darting around. And we're just not as fast as those insects are with our sweep netting. Now, with our passive monitoring, one thing that we're actually doing in different states right now is this yellow sticky card monitoring. So literature shows that corn leafhoppers are attracted to a yellow color. These monitoring cards are very easy to replace. You can go out, place them maybe one per field. If you really want to be very vigilant about it, you could put on multiple sides of the field. But I would think about where prevailing winds are. These insects are really small, so they're likely going to be carried on the wind into the field itself. But you want to adjust basically the height of your trap to the height of that corn. So if your corn is very, very small, just emerging, you're going to want to have that trap low to the ground where that plant is going to be. You could use a garden hook like you see here, or what you could also do is just a wooden stake, and you can buy these yellow sticky cards off of Amazon as well. So this is one way to also be looking for them. Now, in this image here, you're going to realize that you're going to catch other things aside from corn leaf hoppers. So you're going to want to have like a little hand lens to be able to look for those dots in between the eyes, like we showed you earlier. But I can point out to you here that most likely based on coloration, this is a corn leaf hopper, this is a corn leaf hopper, this is a corn leaf hopper, and so on. So really light in color. Some of these darker ones might possibly be too, but they could also be other leaf hoppers as well. So again, verify by looking at them underneath a scope or underneath the hand lens. Now for that chemical control, again, protect it through the V8 stage. There is no economic threshold for this insect. It's important to stress this because of the efficiency of this vector. It is best to just go ahead and assume if you see a corn leaf hopper that it is infective. And to be honest, the further you go up throughout the gradient of the US, the more likely that you're going to have an insect that has already picked up that pathogen and has moved up through the system too. So what are some chemical control suggestions that we can offer you for right now? Well, there are a lot of different options out there. So this first slide, I'm going to show you some based on their active ingredients. So you can be looking for a pyrethroid. You could also be looking for chlorpyrifos or dimethoate, are also known to be active against leafhoppers as well. But I do want to caution in saying that don't trade this devil for another one, I guess you can say, is really be aware of what you're applying, because we also know that these products can also cause problems in terms of flaring up spider mites. So we don't want to change one evil for another. So be mindful of that. We have seen with a quick spray study that Texas A&M AgriLife was able to do on some sweet corn late in the season down in the Rio Grande Valley in the 2024 season, that whenever they applied Savanto Prime through a foliar application, then they were actually able to get about 80% control is what they were estimating when using that product. And so with that, it took about 3 days for that control to be seen. But just know that these products are going to be a little bit more expensive than what I suggested there at the top, but they're also going to have a little bit longer residual too. So there's some trade-offs for you as well. So think about the stage that your corn is at when you're making this decision. So be aware that you might have to do multiple applications or multiple treatments across this season. Continue to scout after treating just based on what that residual is for the product that you applied. And there are some considerations that you could possibly make for maybe an herbicide or insecticide tank mix. Now, this is going to be something that people are talking about in the near future for this. But I want to caution that going ahead and just applying an insecticide when you're already doing an herbicide treatment, that's not exactly integrated pest management. And so you also want to be sure that you're only applying an insecticide when in fact that you actually need to. So the presence of that insect being there is going to be something to be important in taking into account. Also, we don't know yet much about the natural control for the insect in our US systems. So picking something that is going to be more targeted for a leafhopper is something that may be beneficial too, depending on if we have any kind of natural control in our systems. But again, we don't know yet just because this is so early on in these recent infestations. So one other thing that we did at OSU is we've done this leaf dip assay. And if you're unfamiliar with a leaf dip assay, I would encourage you just to Google IRAC leaf dip assay. And we followed a protocol very similar to what they have outlined there specifically for leafhoppers. And so we tested this because it was, again, later in the season. We didn't have corn that was at the appropriate stage for us to be going ahead and spraying in a manner that our producers likely would be. But we wanted to know what are possibly some options based on what's currently labeled for leafhoppers in either field corn and or sweet corn. So I'm going to note that not all of these products are labeled for both. Some are only labeled for field corn, some are only labeled for sweet corn, or maybe a mixture of them. So be sure to always read and follow the label with whatever you're applying. Now, the data I'm showing you here is very preliminary. So we didn't have exactly the statistical support in order to be able to tease apart anything more than patterns. And that's just because our statistical power wasn't great enough. So again, some of our limiting factors were number of corn leaves we could get into the lab, as well as having a population of these leafhoppers based on a lab colony. But what I can tell you is we were able to pick out some patterns in terms of knockdown toxicity. So within the first 24 hours, we saw that Stewart at a 6-ounce rate actually was able to knock back our corn leafhoppers and have 100% mortality within 24 hours. Dimethoate and Savanto, we saw mortality for most of the corn leafhoppers with these treatments within about 48 hours. And then Elevest and Hero gave us our next best knockdown with mortality within 72 hours for the corn leafhoppers that were treated with these products. And so what I really want to highlight here is there are products that are out there and that are available. And while I mentioned that, knockdown is really what this is testing because we're looking at this and again like a small little microcosm petri dish, it's important to note that sometimes you trade out knockdown, how quickly it knocks something out, versus also how long that residual lasts. And so thinking about the behavior of that insect, how it interacts with a foliar applied insecticide is going to be important when you're making these choices. And ultimately, we really need field trials, which means that we also need that insect pressure in order for us to be able to do these field trials so we can validate these results and offer additional control options to our producers in the future. So thinking ahead and going into 2025, I know that Oklahoma State and I know that Kansas State are both monitoring potential overwintering sites currently in the field. And for Oklahoma State, we're expanding our network for the 2025 season. So Dr. Duffeck and I have really worked hard to identify areas that are more corn producing regions in the state. We don't have it all across the state, so we're being strategic about where we're placing out some of these traps. We're working with county educators and extension specialists to get these traps put out. And we were really lucky to have a nice donation from Trace for a lot of their sticky car traps to be able to have this monitoring effort take place. We also know that in talking with other extension entomologists in different states, they're also going to be monitoring going into the 2025 growing season. For us, we're going to be sending out alerts to our producers through our OSU Pest e-alert system. And so I've linked here how you can access our system, as well as also the K-State agronomy alerts, which I believe they're going to be using for sending out alerts too, of where the corn leafhopper is, and also updated management guidance, as well as guidance, on how to scout those fields is going to be really important too. And then just a reminder that if you see an insect and you're not sure what it is, or if you want verification on, are you seeing actually corn stunt pathogens, contact Oklahoma State and contact Kansas State, and our diagnostic labs can help you out with confirming those samples too. And so in thinking again about what's going on in the future, we're really excited to share that we recently just received news that a working group that a team of us from Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Mizzou have actually put forward for a new working group that's looking at monitoring for the corn leafhopper, as well as management guidance for the insect and the disease is forthcoming. And this is going to be made possible with a grant through the Southern IPM Center. And while I highlight the Southern IPM Center and us, Mizzou themselves, they're actually, and I believe Kansas too, y'all are in the north central region, but we actually have a really nice bridge across the Southern IPM centers and the north central regions that are going to be working together with researchers, extension specialists, entomologists, pathologists, and also agronomists at how we can tackle this problem in the future. So with that, I'll go ahead and close out and thank you so much for your time.